We continue now at the top of Daf Zayin Amud Aleph Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 87a. On the previous Talmud, the Gemara said, let's say you have a varim from a carbanola, for example, that are burning on the Mizbeach. Once they become deshen, once they become ashes, so then the burning is finished, and we say there's no more me'ilah. If a person would use it for personal use, there would be no liability in terms of me'ilah. And the Gemara said on the previous Amud, let's say the limbs, they don't become deshen, they don't actually become ashes, but they just harden what's referred to as shariri, so then it's dependent upon chatzos. If before chatzos they come off the Mizbeach and they're just hardened, so then they need to go back on the Mizbeach. They don't have the status yet of deshen, and there would still be me'ilah, but once chatzos passes, once chatzos of the night passes, so then it doesn't need to go back on the Mizbeach. It's considered already to be deshen, the mitzvah has been completed, and there is no me'ilah. And so the Gemara asked on the previous Amud what would happen if, let's say, before chatzos it would be dislodged from the Mizbeach, and it would only be returned to the Mizbeach. These hardened limbs would only be returned to the Mizbeach after chatzos. So then at what point in time would it be considered deshen, assuming that it's not physically deshen, it's not physically ashes? And on that we have a machlokas amoraim. Rabbah says chatzos sheni o chalton. It's actually going to be the next night at chatzos at midnight. That's going to be considered the consumption of these limbs. At that point in time, it's going to have the status of deshen. Rav Chisda says amud hashachar o chalton. You don't have to wait all the way till midnight of the next night, but already at amud hashachar at dawn, that's considered the time that it is that the consumption is finished. Amri bei Rav, they said in the yeshiva of Rav, my time of Rav Chisda. What's the reason of Rav Chisda that it goes by amud hashachar? The reason is as follows: umachatsos of midnight she'ein osa lina. There's no halacha of lina when it comes to midnight. Lina means that the item is left overnight; it wasn't properly put on the mizbeach. That's not determined by midnight. But osa ichud. But we know that chatzos, as we just said, it does create a halacha of deshen, that we say that the limbs have been properly consumed and burned on the mizbeach. So amud hashachar. So when it comes to dawn, she'osa lina. When it comes to dawn, we say there is a halacha of lina by amud hashachar. So eino din she'osa ichul. Isn't it also logical to say that it should create ichul, and that's why we follow amud hashachar according to Rav Chisda. Rashi explains chatzos sheni o chalton. Again, the second chatzos is going to be the finishing of the consumption of the limbs burned on the mizbeach. Shariri did too. Again, we're talking about the hardened limbs. Chatzos sheni shalel hamachras. That means you wait till midnight of the next night. She'eno osa lina. And the logic is as follows: if chatzos, which doesn't create lina, what that's referring to is as follows: lo osa shal ha'oretz. Let's say you have limbs that were on the ground; they weren't brought on the mizbeach. Sharei kol halayla kosher lahalosan min ha'oretz u'lemizbeach. The halach is you have all night to bring them up from the ground to the mizbeach in order to be burned. T'chsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, lo yolin chelav chagi ad boker hakol halayla yolin. It can't be left overnight till the morning, but you do have all night to bring them up. So that's until dawn. So if that is until dawn, it makes sense to say again that the ichul is until dawn. And the Gemara continues, Pirshu kodem chatzos. Let's say they separate before chatzos, before midnight, and then vechzirin, and then he returns them liachar amud hashachar. He returns them after dawn. So what would be the halacha in that situation? And again, we have a machlokas amoraim. Rabba says again the same thing. Chatzos sheni o chalton. You wait till the second midnight, and that's going to be the halacha of ichul. At that point in time, it's considered consumed. Rav Chisda says since it was returned after dawn, and according to Rav Chisda, dawn is the time, is the off, so ein bohen ichol liolam, then there is no halacha of ichol for them forever. And Rashi explains osa ichol shrirei de maracha. Again, we're talking about the shrirei, the hardened limbs again. And Rav Chisda says ein bohen ichol liolam. What that means is v'chol shapoken. That means anytime it gets dislodged, yachzer, you just have to keep returning it. Umoalin behem, and there's always going to be me'ilah ad sheyasu deshen, until they physically become deshen. That's Rav Chisda's opinion. And the Gemara continues, Maskef lo Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef asks the following question: Uman leimolon chatzos barosh hamizbeach meshavi lo ichol. Ichol. Who even says that chatzos has to be that it has to be on the mizbeach for the halach of ichol to apply? Why are we saying that just because it became dislodged from the mizbeach, therefore there's no midnight halach of ichol? That can only happen when it's on the mizbeach. Dilma kol hechad demeshacholuhu, maybe anywhere where these limbs are found, meshavi lu ichol, the halacha of ichol does apply, and therefore we would say it doesn't even matter that it got dislodged. It's a hardened limb, and midnight has passed, and therefore ichol has been finished. And shalchu mitam, they sent from there hilchis Rav Yosef. The halacha is like Rav Yosef. That is correct. That's what they sent from Eretz Yisrael. Itmar nami, and it was also stated. Amar Rav Chia bar Abba. Rav Chia bar Abba says, Pershu kodem chatzos, if they separated before chatzos, v'achziron achar chatzos, and then it was returned after chatzos, lo nenin, so you shouldn't derive benefit on a derabanan level. However, v'lo mo'elin, there is no me'ilah, because we say that the chatzos is effective in order to say that there's ichol and there's no me'ilah. V'chein tana bar kapara, and that's what bar kapara taught as well. Pershu kodem chatzos, if they separate before chatzos, v'achziron li'achar chatzos, and then they were returned after chatzos, yotzin midei me'ilah. So we say there is no me'ilah. And Rashi explains, Kol hechad demashkachas lahu, maybe we say that anywhere where they are found. That's what Rav Yosef argues. Hilkach, therefore, pershu kodem chatzos nami, even if they separate before chatzos. Harehein ichol b'chatzos, still the halach of ichol will set in chatzos. Va'afilu echziron la'achar chatzos, even if he returns them after chatzos. And ein mo'elin behen, there is no me'ilah, v'lo tzarech la'achziron, you don't need to return them. V'yotzu midei me'ilah garsinon, there is no halacha me'ilah. The proper text is yotzu midei me'ilah, v'lo nanin midrabanan, and you just don't get hana on a derabanan level. You're not supposed to get hana, but there is no me'ilah. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Papa li Abaye, Rav Papa said to Abaye, V'chimeachar deshalchu mitam hilchas Rav Yosef. If they sent a message from there that the halach is like Rav Yosef. V'yomer Rav Chia bar Abba, v'chein tani bar kapara, and Rav Chia bar Abba said the same thing, and bar kapara taught the same thing. So then Rabba v'Rav Chisda b'mai pligi, what were Rabba and Rav Chisda even arguing about? It doesn't seem like anyone should take a position against what Rav Yosef said. And the Gemara says, Amar le, he said back to him, Bishmeinim, they were arguing in a different case. They were arguing when it's surrounded by fat, when these limbs are fatty. In that situation, there was a machlokus. What happens in this case? Rashi explains, Rabba v'Rav Chisda b'mai pligi lomar d'lo havi ichol b'chatzos. What were they arguing about? Because again, both Rabba and Rav Chisda say that there's no ichol at chatzos if it's not on the mizbeach. And the Gemara answers they were actually arguing b'shmeinim. They were actually arguing when they're fat, meaning afilu hukshu. What they were arguing was as follows. Let's say you had limbs that were hardened, but they were shmeinim, they were fatty, lo havi ichol. So then we say that there is no ichol at chatzos, the shomnon ma'akvon meleosos deshen, because the fact that they're fat, that actually stops them from being called deshen, that stops them from being called ashes, and that was the machlokas between Rabba and Rav Chisda. In that situation, what is going to create the ichol? Again, is it going to be dawn, or is it going to be the next midnight? And the commentaries do discuss that if the fact that these limbs are fatty, if that's preventing them from being considered to have the status of ichol, of being consumed, so then what difference does it make now if you wait until the second midnight or if you wait until dawn? Again, the fact that they're fatty limbs should still continue to prevent that, and that is a discussion among the commentaries. And the Gemara continues, Boy minei Rava me Rabba. Rava asked Rabba the following question, Lina moeles barosha shel mizbeach, oina moeles barosha shel mizbeach. Is there a concept of lina? Let's say you leave the limbs at the top of the mizbeach, but you're not burning them. So if they're left over there as opposed to being left on the ground, is that the halacha of lina or not? And the Gemara says, hey chidami, well, what exactly is the case? Ilema de lo yerd, if you're going to say we're talking about a situation where the limbs never came down from the mizbeach, they're just up there on the mizbeach. So hashta now, lono ba'azara, if let's say there was lina in the azara, it was just on the floor of the azara, so amrit de lo yerd, the halacha is then that if you bring it up on the mizbeach, you don't take it down. So barosha shel mizbeach mi boy, so if it's left on the top of the mizbeach, is there a question? Of course, you're not going to take them down from the mizbeach. And so the Gemara continues, Ve'ela, rather the yerdu, the question is, if they came down, again, is there a status of lina? L'shulchan midaminon lo, do we compare to the shulchan? The Tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah, and this is a Mishnah in Menachos with regards to the lechem haponim on the shulchan. Afilu hein al shulchan yomim rabim, even if they're left on the table for many days, ein bekach klum, that's not an issue because they're on the table, and therefore that's not considered, so to speak, an issue of lina. And the same thing is true when it comes to rosha shel mizbeach over here. Odilma, or maybe lekarka midaminan, we compare it to the karka, it's as if it's on the earth, it's as if it's on the ground, and therefore there is lina. And the Gemara continues, Amar le, he said back to him, again, this was a question of Rava from Rabba. So Rabba responded, Ein lina barosha shel mizbeach. There's no concept of lina if it's on the top of the mizbeach. The Gemara says, Kibla minei lo, did he accept this answer from him or not? Did Rava accept this answer? And the Gemara says, Tashma, come and hear the following proof. The Itmar, it was stated the following Machlukas Amoraim, a Vorim Shalonu Ba'azara, if you have limbs that they were left overnight in the Azara, so Mekater V'holech Kol Alayla, you have all night to burn them. Lon Barosho Shal Mizbeach, now if they were left overnight on the top of the Mizbeach, so Mekater V'holech Liolam, you're able to burn them forever. There's no concept of Lina in that situation, of course, because it hasn't even come down from the Mizbeach, that everybody agrees to. But Yardu, let's say it came down from the Mizbeach, so there we have a Machlokas Amoraim. Rabba Amar Yalu, Rabba says that they can go back up on the Mizbeach, because again, as we just saw, Rabba says, Ein Lina Barosho Shal Mizbeach. Rava Amar Lo Yalu, but Rava says no, he argues they cannot go back up on the Mizbeach, and Shma Mina Lo Kibla Minei, we see from here that he did not accept the answer of Rabba. Rava disagrees with Rabba, and the Gemara says Shma Mina. Indeed, we see that this is the case. And Rashi explains, Ilema delo yerdu, if you're going to say that they didn't come down from the Mizbeach, again, Barosha shal Mizbeach, Osan shemotzam b'shachar, Barosha Mizbeach shalo b'ma'aracha, they're found in the morning at the top of the Mizbeach, but not in the fire. So then, of course, in that situation, we're going to say they don't come down. Ela de yerdu, rather the case is they did come down min ha-Mizbeach la'achar amur ha-shachar, they came down from the Mizbeach after dawn. Mi boy loch, that's your question, mi have kashar lonim v'nifsolim b'amur ha-shachar, do we say it's like a normal case of Lina, it is now disqualified at dawn? Utnan bepsulam kachim yerdu lo yalu. In such a case, if it comes down, it doesn't go back up. O dilma ein lina moelis v'lo nifsalu v'yachzor v'yalim. Or maybe lina at the top of the mizbeach is not an issue. It doesn't become disqualified, and therefore it's going to be able to go back up. L'shulchan medaminan lo. Do we compare to the shulchan lemizbeach? We compare the shulchan to the mizbeach. Shein lechem aponim nifsal olav im lon bo lachar zmanu. If the lechem aponim stay on the shulchan after the amount of time, there is no disqualification. And Rashi continues, Odilmor, maybe lekarka azara medamin Allah. Maybe we compare it to the karka of the azara. We don't compare it to the shulchan. To ritzbas binyan hikamos. It's like something that is built like the azara v'lo klishares keshulchan. It's not like a klishares like the shulchan, so you can't compare it to the shulchan. And again, the Gemara said this issue is a machlokas Rabba and Rava. Rava did not accept the answer of Rabba. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Keshem shah mizbeach mekadesh, just like the mizbeach sanctifies that which is fit for it, so too the kevesh, so too the ram sanctifies. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Hanugeya b'mizbeach, it says that which touches the mizbeach, Ein li ela mizbeach, so I only know the mizbeach itself. Kevesh minayin, how do we know the ramp of the mizbeach? Talmud lomar es ha-mizbeach, the pasuk says es ha-mizbeach. And klei sharis minayin, how do we know this is true? By the klei sharis as well, the kelim of the Beis HaMikdash. Talmud lomar, the pasuk says, Kol hanugeya b'hem yikdash, so we learn from that pasuk that it applies to klei sharis as well. Rashi explains, Es ha-mizbeach u'mashachta es ha-mizbeach l'rabos es ha-kevesh. Again, it says Es ha-mizbeach, that includes the ramp. And again, Hachi Garsinan, this is the proper text, Klei sharis minayin, kol hanogea behen yikdosh. And the Gemara continues, Boy minei Reish Lakish me Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish asks Rabbi Yochanan the following question. Klei sharis ma'u sheyakadshu es ha-psulin. Can Klei sharis, can they sanctify that which is disqualified? And Rashi explains, Ma'u sheyikdashu psulin, hu sover le'inyan pidyon kami boile. He initially thought that the question that was being asked over here is in terms of redemption. Kagon, for example, the question would be as follows, Mincha Tameya, let's say you have a mincha that is impure, Shekitsha b'chli shares, that was sanctified in a kli shares. So Mikadsha Kedushas Haguf, do we say that in such a situation it is in fact sanctified? V'lo nafka lehu lechulin, and then it wouldn't be able to be taken out and become chulin again, to Kidsha Kli, because it's been sanctified in a vessel. Afal Pishi Tameya, even though it was Tameh, but still we say that it's Mekadesh. That's one side of the question. O lo kitcha, or do we say no, it's not sanctified because we're talking here about a mincha again that's tameya, and therefore it is not sanctified. That was the question of yikdashu psulin, and again the whole question has to do with whether or not redemption is possible. Was it sanctified, and therefore redemption is not possible, or do we say that it's not sanctified? Utnan, we learned in the Mishnah, ha-minachos v'ha-nesachim shenitmu. We say in general that if you have a mincha or nesachim that become tamei, yesh lahem pidyon, then we say the halach is they could be redeemed. But if after they were sanctified in a vessel they become tamei, then they have no redemption. And so that's the whole question over here. Let's say it was tamei and then it goes in the kli shares. Is it going to be sanctified? That's how he initially understood the question. And so the Gemara says Amar Le, that he said back to him, Tani Suah, we learn the answer to this in our Mishnah. Kishem sham mizbeach v'akevesh mekadshin esaroy lahen. Just like the mizbeach and the ramp sanctify what is fit for them. Kach kelim mekadshin, so to the kelim, they also are mekadesh. And Rashi explains, Amar Le Tani Su, he said, we learned the answer in the Mishnah, to Mekachin, that in fact they are sanctified, Ve'ein Lahem Pidyon, and there is no redemption. That's exactly what our Mishnah says. But the Gemara continues, Amar Le, he said back to him, L'chatchila likarev kami boili. My question actually was, is it sanctified l'chatchila that it can be offered? Rashi explains, Amar Le said to him, L'chatchila likarev kami boili. The question is, l'chatchila, can it be offered? Meaning, v'lo le'inyan pidyon. We're not asking here in terms of redemption. And the Gemara continues that Rabbi Yochanan responds, Hanami Tanina, that also we learned in a Mishnah, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Zayin Amid Beis.